coming up, our homes and offices account for almost half of all energy usage and use of raw materials worldwide. A complete shift away from the status quo won't be cheap or convenient.
This involves convincing millions or billions of people to change behaviours.
These flowers in Spain blossom weeks ahead of schedule. And
put your seatbelts back on.
Does turbulence freak you out?
Mother Nature is also becoming much more savvy in the storms she's throwing at us.
There's a lot of unpredictable weather on the horizon. Can airplanes adapt?
These are extraordinary conditions, and the airlines are not always fully liable to take care of us.
Just 2 degrees is on now.
Does the quality of the aircraft have anything to do with the amount of turbulence it can withstand?
Spring is in the air. I'll see lovers everywhere. I'm singing a song. I won't do anything wrong. But now you can see me. Why did you treat and make me feel this way? La la la, la 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 la. That's a 60s tune by the Dutch pop group Vignes. There is a problem though. When we filmed this episode toward the end of February, we found out that almond trees in Spain began blossoming in January, which should be smack in the middle of the coldest season. Well, almond trees do begin blossoming in winter, but these began 18 days to 3 weeks earlier than usual.
El canvi climàtic afecta directament amb l'avançament de la floració. Han passat durant unes quantes dècades d'hiverns intensos amb fred i boires, amb hiverns que pràcticament són primaverals.
As each year passes, nature is increasingly out of whack. And sometimes when we tinker with ecological processes, we make things worse. Take the iguana, for instance. This beautiful lizard is native to Central and South America, but 20 years ago, imports to Taiwan began in the exotic pet trade. And as these stories go, some people were unable to care for them, so many escaped or were dumped. And in Taiwan's warm climate, their numbers exploded. There's now a nationwide drive to hunt and kill the iguanas, which the Taiwanese government has labeled as pests. Oh, the irony.
我们开始受到绿鬣蜥的威胁，大概就是5-6年前，但是那时候只有少量。那后来越来越繁殖越多，然后作物越吃越多，大家才开始去围捕它，去重视这个问题。然后就是只能用围捕的方式，因为它的动作很快，我们根本抓不到它。
Let's just start with iguanas in general. I know where I'm from in the Caribbean, iguanas are a common sight, except the young ones. They're super green and they camouflage really well. People, when they see them, are normally afraid of them. When they're grown, they're very intimidating looking creatures. Why do you like iguanas? From what I understand, I don't think they're endemic to Virginia, are they?
No, iguanas are an endemic Virginia. We haven't had lizards like that up here for, I guess, for hundreds of millions of years. Iguanas are an amazing group of lizards. They represent tens of millions of years of evolution and stretch across the South Pacific through Central America, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and up into the actually southern islands of the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos. And then, of course, squeeze all the way down to the northern part of South America.
I'm not too sure if you saw the situation in Taiwan where for about 2 decades, they had initially brought iguanas in from Central and South America as exotic pets. But then they weren't able to take care of them. They abandoned many iguanas, some escaped, and then they multiplied and boomed, particularly as the earth is warming up. But right now, they're culling them, they're catching them in the hundreds, thousands. What is your first reaction when you hear about the situation, the sequence of events that led to this?
Well, I mean, my first reaction when I think about feral green iguana populations in different parts of the world is that they're a result of a rather haphazard international trade. And unfortunately, this proliferation of green iguanas in captivity and in feral populations really draws attention away from the 45 other species of iguanas, most of which are threatened with extinction. People don't realize it, but around 70% of iguana species are threatened with extinction, which is a far higher rate than mammals or birds or amphibians or turtles. But the green iguana is just one of those dynamic species that is able to adapt to new circumstances. They have a very high reproductive rate, a fecundity rate. They make a lot of babies.
As far as I recall, iguanas are herbivores. I'm not sure if they eat anything other than fruit or vegetables. Can you talk about the need for us to have iguanas in the environment?
Well, iguanas, if you look at, for example, the Caribbean islands, where many of them have a unique iguana that occurs nowhere else in the world, these animals are critical for seed dispersal. The plants they eat, they consume the seeds, they defecate the seeds later on, and boom, you get new plants. You literally impact forest health and forest regeneration if you remove the animals that are dispersing the seeds. And of course, you know, when you ruin forests, you get increased siltation into the ocean, you affect coral reefs. You know, all these things in some ways are tied together. So maybe it's a stretch to say iguana conservation is coral reef conservation, but I think it's important to recognize that these things do fit together into a larger web.
What does the International Iguana Federation do to conserve iguanas?
Well, it's the International Iguana Foundation. We're coming up on our 25th anniversary in a couple of years.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we're very proud to have been around for that long. We provide grants for conservation work, education and outreach, scientific study, restoration of habitat, and restoration of iguana populations wherever we work. We've given out over $1.2 million in grants, and that's covered 25 species, over 20 islands and countries and territories. You know, we're going to keep at it. Our goal is to grow, to do more conservation for more species wherever they occur.
Any advice for someone possibly seeing an iguana in the wild for the first time? I know human beings have a tendency to kill everything we're afraid of. How would you advise people who see one in the wild treat it?
Enjoy watching it from a safe distance. These are spectacular animals. These are intelligent animals, and they have unique sets of behavior as they go around the human-centered world. So check them out. Enjoy them from a distance. You don't want to grab them. They won't like it, and you're probably not going to like it. They have razor-sharp teeth.
Back in 2021, the UN brought together some of the world's leading banks, who said at the time that they were committed to aligning their lending and investment activities with net zero targets by the year 2050. In their commitment statement, the banks promised, among many things, to transition the operational and attributable greenhouse gas emissions from their portfolios and provide annual progress reports. It was a popular endeavor. The Net Zero Banking Alliance released its growth report in October 2024, saying that since the alliance was launched in 2021, membership had more than tripled to 135 banks in 44 countries, with $56 trillion in total assets. Alliance member banks from France, Brazil, the US, the UAE, to name a few, branded themselves as climate responsible institutions who would go above and beyond for the sake of the planet. It seems things were not as they seemed. Well, the crisis in confidence regarding achieving net zeros and stopping experts at the Energy Transitions Commission based in the UK, who firmly believe that cities, no matter where they are, whether wealthy or not, can all decarbonize.
The buildings and construction sector is pretty tough topic. They account for about 37% of global emissions, huge number. And we know there's appetite to identify best practice and fund decarbonization efforts. What do you see as the biggest challenge of that?
Yeah, we wanted to shine a light on just how important the buildings decarbonization challenge is globally. Unlike other parts of the energy transition, buildings are close to home. I'm in a building today, you're in a building today, and actually you and I probably have a bit more power on how to change and decarbonize some of those buildings than we do with faraway power stations or industrial installations and things like that. But because of that, it is one of the most challenging sectors to decarbonize. This involves convincing millions or billions of people to change behaviors, to buy new technologies, and ultimately to do things that they may not be considering, unlike in other parts of the global energy transition. But the good news we have is we think there's a lot of cost-effective technologies that consumers and people can embrace in order to accelerate buildings decarbonization. But the interesting thing about the building story again is it's different depending on where we are in the world. The technologies that I could use or introduce where I am today in the United Kingdom are very different to the ones that you might be using, for example. And that's where we really focus and try and put it all together in this report on what is the relative role of which type of technologies in which regions, and what does that mean for the local energy transition in that region.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm guessing only wealthy countries can afford to really bring down their construction emissions by insulating their power plants or really taking advantage of the carbon credit system. Do you have any recommendations for the global south? Because you kind of brought that up a bit.
Well, interestingly, in the global south, there's no heating challenge in many global south countries. It's all about cooling, and cooling tends to be cheaper than heating overall. The good thing about cooling is where it's powered through air conditioning, it's already powered through electricity, and clean electricity through wind and solar projects, for example, or wind and solar with batteries, is cheaper than fossil fuel electricity in the vast majority of the world, including in the global south. So there isn't necessarily a barrier to decarbonizing, say, cooling in that area.
No, what do you say to a hot Caribbean island like, say, Barbados, that can't fund its own transition away from fossil fuels?
Well, increasingly, there's a lot of promise in low carbon technologies, and I think that the growth in energy that Barbados will be experiencing can be met through solar power and batteries, for example. In fact, in countries like Barbados, most houses or properties will be able to be almost fully powered by cheap solar, cheap batteries. I mean, it is worth just reflecting on how quickly the cost of those technologies are coming down. In the 35 years up until 2020, the cost of solar power went down 90%. Since 2020, it's down another 90%. Battery costs are down 50% in the last year alone. And these are increasingly household offerings. We note, for example, that in Pakistan, in the last year, around 50% of the total size of their electricity system has been installed in small premises in solar panels, just because it's become cheaper than using actual grid electricity there. And we think those kind of lessons can extend actually to the majority of what we call the global south.
You mentioned pricing in terms of the global south. Even though renewable energy is cheaper, many countries still can't afford, and they're trying to just cope with yearly climate disasters. That's a cost in itself. They have to keep borrowing from the World Bank, the IMF. I'm curious about your thoughts on climate refuge and migration. People are moving to higher ground, others within their own countries, others are moving to other countries in more profitable cities, if you will. Do you see a problem in, say, the spacing of construction and power generation as their numbers build up in these wealthy cities? Although wealthy, there's crunch for space.
It's a great question, and one that's not talked about enough in the climate space. I think last year saw the world reach 1.5 degrees of global warming already. And that, as a reminder, is the world's agreed target to limit warming to. So that is a very worrying sign. And we're seeing increased climate catastrophes around the world, and that is going to lead. It is already leading to migration. As you make cities denser, you may be facing more challenges, particularly in cities which require high levels of cooling demand, where if cooling is met through air conditioning, the air conditioners itself increase heat in the city. So you make the problem worse by cooling the inside of the building. And that's a point we really note within our report. But there are many things you can do to cool which don't involve air conditioning too, and they may also be cheaper. And that's another point we note as well. Smart city design can get around a lot of this. Just introducing shading when you're building new districts of a city, making sure they're well shaded through the planting of a few trees or through external shading on buildings will be far more cost effective than using an air conditioner. It won't increase your heat. It won't increase your energy bills. It will just make you cooler from the off. Painting roofs white, for example. I think most countries at least can afford tins of white paint. Can also be very cost effective and more cost effective than air conditioning. So it's certainly an increasing problem, and certainly the one that the world needs to focus on. But there are many solutions when you look beyond the obvious ones, such as air conditioning and things like that. And in a way, that does give me reason for optimism that some of those challenges can be addressed, even though we live in these challenging times.
Based on your research at Energy Transitions Commission, and based on everything you've learned about the global North and South, can you give an estimate year when you think the world will, everyone on the planet, all 8 billion people, well, not 8 billion, many are kids, but the vast majority of us are at a place where we live and work can at least offset its emissions? Do you see this in decades, centuries? When do you see this happening?
The focus of our work is at the Energy Transitions Commission is on the world achieving net zero emissions. So close to zero emissions with anything else offset by mid-century. And we think that is possible in every country. Some countries which will be much further ahead than that. For example, the UK, where I sit today, is aiming to have a zero carbon electricity system in 5 years' time. Many rich countries will be able to afford to do that. And the lessons and innovation spillovers from countries doing that will extend broadly to the rest of the world as well. And we're seeing that with solar power, we're seeing that with batteries, we're seeing that with electric vehicles already being cost effective in the majority of the world's markets. So we are very optimistic about that. There are other more difficult sectors which will take more time.
All right, picture this. You're on a plane on mid-flight, your tray table starts shaking, and the PA announcement comes on from the flight attendant who says, please buckle your seatbelt. It's pretty routine, right? Well, we're told that turbulence poses no significant risk once you're buckled in. But in recent years, extreme cases have caused hundreds of injuries, including broken bones and even brain or spinal traumas. The scary part is that it can strike without warning, sending unbelted passengers flying through the cabin. Aviation experts blame unpredictable weather patterns, which are driving stronger winds and making flights bumpier. In late February, budget airline Ryanair alerted its UK customers that strong winds were on the horizon. When you're inside a plane, it feels, and there's turbulence, it feels as though you're jumping up and down. The plane is jumping up and down. But I'm not too sure whether it looks like that from the outside. What exactly happens to an aircraft during turbulence?
When we're in the aircraft and we see that the aircraft is experiencing, and we feel it, turbulence, because first notification, the pilot will come on and let us know, put your seatbelts back on, and we know from last year, put items to the side and remove all beverages. We feel the turbulence, but what's critical to recognize is that aircraft technology has evolved so that not only the fiber, the carbon that is being used in the fuselage, the main aircraft, but the wings, importantly, the wings have evolved. The wings are very flexible. So if they're being hit by strong winds, either directly or from the side, they're able to absorb a great deal. Equally, we see those little wing tips at the ends of the wings. That helps stabilize the aircraft. So the aircraft is absorbing a great deal of the shock. The challenge is that, like with last year, we are movable items within the aircraft. So if we are not strapped down and held within the frame, everything is going to be experiencing the motion of the turbulence, even though the aircraft is absorbing quite a bit of the drama from us.
Wikipedia describes Ryanair as an Irish ultra-low cost airline. Does the quality of the aircraft have anything to do with the amount of turbulence it can withstand?
Absolutely not. And it's a really important point you make. No one, no aircraft manufacturer and no airline will compete on safety. Absolutely none. So the aircraft that they're utilizing is very much the same. So the 737 MAX being used by Ryanair will be the same as being used by Singapore Airlines. The pricing of the aircraft differs when it comes to the amenities, the extras within the aircraft itself.
I'm sure a lot of people will be incredibly relieved to hear what you just said. I know I am, for sure. Now, Ryanair said they were nervous about these 70 miles per hour converted as 113 kilometers per hour or so winds, which is near the strength of a Category 1 hurricane. How strong a wind can these planes withstand?
A lot of it depends on the type of wind, the humidity involved, and whether or not there are storms. So if there is lightning, if it's a hurricane. So it's a tricky one, but these aircraft, when they're developed, are tested exponentially to be able to withstand them. So if we look at what happened, for instance, with the Delta aircraft that flipped at YYZ, which is Toronto International Airport, that was a side wind that was hitting the runway with a very strong blizzard conditions that impacted visibility. The aircraft was flipped. In testing of aircraft when they're being built, that is part of it. Because in the past, before technology had advanced to where it is now, when an aircraft had flipped, ultimately the pressure of the flip and the wing could crush those inside the fuselage. That has changed. The wings have now evolved to be able to, at a point, detach themselves or at least separate in a way that is much more flexible so it doesn't hurt the aircraft fuselage and those within it. What is very important to recognize and to give credit is that whether it's Ryanair, Singapore Airlines, Qatar Airways, whatever the airline might be, they're becoming much more proactive in letting us know. You and I as passengers want to find out about the winds on the ground, not when we're in the aircraft. We're seeing more now severe weather conditions in terms of hurricanes, winter weather to the Caribbean, that traditional hurricane zone is getting much more damaging storms coming through, and importantly, much more frequently. So once you've gone through one, you suddenly realize you're being hit by another. So the more that they are notifying us in advance, the more we can check and recheck that our aircraft is safe to fly.
The most dangerous times for an aircraft is when it's taking off and when it's landing. I've heard this a lot before in the past. Is it true? And if it is, does any of this have to do with wind?
It's exactly because of that when you reach a certain altitude, so much is much more stabilized. You're in that cruising altitude. There is less likelihood of a shock unless, again, you hit one of those, like we had last year, those patches of turbulence. When you're landing and when you're taking off, that's when there are so many more elements at play in terms of the conditions of what is required at actually landing an aircraft and the environmental conditions around it.
I know scientists at Reading University in the UK, they project that the frequency of clear air turbulence events will double by the year 2050, and the intensity will increase by 40%. Is this something you are also wary of?
I'm not fearful of it because I know what the aviation community is doing in terms of their commitment to innovation. When you speak to the leaders of the airlines, of the manufacturers, all of them are one community bound and committed to safety of travel, whether it's cargo or passengers. So as much as Mother Nature is getting cheekier, they are getting smarter so that we can fly much more safely.
And that's our show. As the credits roll, take a look at this. An innovative project in Tasmania is restoring a 5,000-hectare property called the Quine, in which there are large numbers of forested kangaroos and the endangered Tasmanian devil. And that's after a century of sheep grazing left the land in some pretty poor condition.